are talking tentacles, or to give it its Italian name, TENTACOLI, because this, despite being filmed in America and having a largely American cast, it is actually an Italian production. So TENTACOLI, I suppose, is its official name. And this is directed by, and you'll excuse the pronunciation here, Vito G. Asontis, who I think directed Madhouse as well. And this is a response to the movie Jaws. Now, this came out in 1977. The story is very, very similar to that of Jaws, though it does have elements of Jaws 2 in it as well, albeit this did come out actually before Jaws 2. So what is the story? Well, it focuses on a kind of coastal town in America somewhere that is plagued by a human-eating giant octopus, which may have been disturbed by this local industrial company to kind of doing drilling. And it's up to the local reporter, a kind of a marine biologist, and a kind of a cop to try and stop this creature from eating the local inhabitants. What will happen? You will have to watch the movie to find out. Now, I'm a big sucker for creature features, especially aquatic creature features. So I'm always happy to kind of watch a movie like this. And you know, giant octopus, they don't get as much love as sharks, do they? So we don't see as many movies, although there have been a few here and there. What can I say in the plus column of this one then? I've got to say, I think the acting is fairly strong here. For the time, there was a few kind of recognisable names here. And I think they do a fairly good job in kind of regard to the kind of their acting chops here. I think everyone does I mean, the direction isn't fantastic, as we'll come on to, but I think the acting here, you can't really, you know, turn your nose up too much at. But I think that the actors do their best that they can with the actual, you know, the material that they're given here. Now, this is kind of, you know, revived to be one of the kind of the worst movies ever made in some circles. I don't think it's that bad, if I'm completely honest. I mean, the movie's plot is very, very reminiscent to Jaws. You know, the local kind of celebration with this kind of boat race and things like that, and we've seen it all kind of before. Corrupt officials, you know, it's nothing you haven't seen before in regards to kind of plot wise, but nonetheless there is still some entertainment value to be had here. Now, you might be thinking, how are they going to do the kind of the effects in 1977 for a kind of an octopus? Probably harder due to its kind of body type than a kind of a shark in many ways, and certainly for a kind of a Italian low budget essentially rip-off of Jaws. And essentially they use kind of real octopus for a lot of the shots, but kind of you know, make it look like through editing it's kind of obviously bigger than it kind of really is and things like that. There's a couple of kind of model shots, and you know, there are some shots for the time, I will say, that are, you know, relatively effective, you know, with certain kind of like expectations in place there. I don't think there are, you know, there's some okay kind of shots in regards to sort of special effects, and that's kind of really, I can't say too much good stuff about this movie because it isn't particularly a good film in many aspects. So the movie, unfortunately, I think its main critique is it's quite dull. And I mean, how do you make a giant killer octopus movie dull? But unfortunately this movie manages it, because there are long kind of drawn out scenes. There are way too kind of many kind of like talky scenes and kind of like just kind of like run, you know, to stretch out the running time. Now, you may argue that Jaws, you see very little of the shark, and that is absolutely true. But Jaws is a masterclass about how to have engaging characters. This one, despite the best efforts of the actors here, is not. I never really felt like you really got to know any of the kind of the characters here. It's all very kind of surface level. There's probably too many characters, to be honest with you, and everyone here, the dialogue is pretty terrible, to be honest. So even though I think the actors do the best job that they can with the sort of the source material here, the execution from behind the camera is severely lacking, and this really doesn't help in making engaging characters with a kind of like, you know, real kind of motivations with, you know, believable dialogue, things like that. But it's also not helped by some quite poor technical elements. The soundtrack here is one of the worst kind of soundtracks that kind of doesn't suit the movie. It sounds more like kind of an Addams Family kind of jingle a lot of the time. It's terrible kind of like music, and you know, again, think of how Jaws used kind of John Williams' score to really intensify those scenes. Now obviously they can't do a complete rip-off of the Jaws theme, although maybe some have tried arguably, but this music just doesn't fit at all. And then we've got to come to the kind of the actual technical elements of the actual film itself. And this is down to the director. Some horrible editing choices. We've got really kind of drawn out scenes with little to no kind of even sound sometimes. You know, we have like scenes where there's no kind of like music, no kind of like, or maybe the odd kind of like rustling sound, things like this, or no dialogue. It's just horrible in places in regards to its kind of editing choices and things like that. I think the camera work is pretty awful at times. And then we have these kind of like these weird little kind of decisions that is made in the movie that we have, for example, these freeze frames for no kind of apparent reason, and even some stuff which is that is filmed is some odd choices. There's a sequence, for example, where we have a couple of people getting attacked by the octopus, and for some reason their legs are sticking rigid out the water. It's like, what's going on? So there's certainly some odd choices. The movie isn't particularly kind of like ever scary, or it never really kind of builds any type of tension, despite having clearly Jaws influenced POV shots from our sort of creature and things like that. There's no kind of building up of the tension or anything like that, if I'm completely honest. And although I think there are some shots that do work in regards to using this kind of probably a real octopus that was dead, that were just kind of swishing around, there are other sequences where obviously it doesn't look good. I'm a little bit forgiving of that, to be honest with you. It is a low budget 1977 movie, so I can't expect too much in regards to that. So personally speaking, that won't affect my judgment of it too much, but I can obviously appreciate if people might feel kind of differently with that. I think the ending is quite, I mean, it has some interesting protagonists, I would say, but the execution once again is pretty poor. In actual fact, the movie largely doesn't have a kind of essential character. The first half of the movie kind of focuses on this kind of reporter, and then the second half kind of focuses more on this kind of biologist, who arguably you don't really have a one person who you are sort of following through the kind of the course of the movie. And the actual kind of the corporate intrigue and the kind of the padding out sort of sequences of these kind of conspiracy and dodgy dealings, again, it kind of feels pointless and kind of typical here. There's never really a standout moment in the film, so it's ultimately a fairly dull movie at the end of the day, and never really kind of gets you particularly kind of excited. And there's obviously maybe this would have been better had it been made a few years later when technology maybe could have improved the effects to somewhat, but obviously people were in the throes of Jaws mania and all these kind of like movies coming out at the time. I don't think it's like one of the worst movies ever made. I mean, obviously we've seen movies that more or less kind of carbon copy the Jaws template in regards to kind of story, and although it's certainly an original, that's a good template for a reason. So there is still some entertainment value to be had, even though it is obviously very much copying kind of from the Jaws kind of playbook there. But you know, the Jaws story was a good story, so people are going to copy for it. I'm going to give this one a 4 out of 10. It is a below average film, certainly, but it's not without some entertainment value. And again, I have to give it some leeway just for the kind of the low budget and the kind of the time it was made. So it's a 4 out of 10 for me, and I feel like I'm being quite generous there, if I'm completely honest with you. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.